A few years ago, I decided to dip my toes back into the dating pool after a long hiatus. Like many, I turned to dating apps to find a potential match. After a few days of swiping and chatting, I matched with a woman named Claire. She was beautiful, with bright blue eyes and a warm smile, and we seemed to have a lot in common. We exchanged messages for a while, and it wasn't long before we decided to meet in person. Claire suggested a quaint little cafe on the outskirts of town for our first date. It was a charming place, cozy and intimate, perfect for getting to know someone. I arrived a bit early, my nerves buzzing with anticipation. The cafe was nearly empty, just a few patrons quietly sipping their coffees and reading books. Claire arrived a few minutes later, and she looked even more stunning in person. We greeted each other with a hug and settled into a corner booth. The conversation flowed easily, and I felt a genuine connection forming. We laughed and shared stories, and the time seemed to fly by. As the evening wore on, Claire suggested we take a walk. The cafe was near a park, and the idea of a moonlit stroll sounded romantic. We left the cafe and walked side by side through the quiet streets. The park was serene, with the soft glow of streetlights casting long shadows on the path. We talked about our favorite movies and books, our childhood memories, and our dreams for the future. It felt like the perfect first date, and I was already looking forward to seeing her again. We reached a small pond in the center of the park and sat on a bench, watching the reflections of the trees dance on the water's surface. Then things took an unexpected turn. Claire's demeanor shifted subtly. Her bright eyes grew distant, and her smile faded. She began to ask me strange questions, ones that felt oddly personal and invasive. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked, her voice soft but intense. "Sure, I guess so," I replied, a bit taken aback by the sudden change in tone. She looked at me, her eyes locking onto mine. "Do you believe in past lives? In unfinished business?" I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I don't know. I haven't really thought about it much." Claire leaned closer, her expression unreadable. "What if I told you we had met before, in another life, that we have unfinished business?" A chill ran down my spine. The once romantic atmosphere of the park now felt eerie and unsettling. I tried to laugh it off, but the look in her eyes told me she was serious. "I think we should get going," I said, trying to sound casual. "It's getting late." Claire didn't move. "Do you remember what you did to me?" Her words hung in the air, heavy and accusing. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "What are you talking about?" Her face twisted with anger and sadness. "You betrayed me. You left me to die." I stood up, my heart pounding. "I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe we should just call it a night." Claire stood as well, her eyes never leaving mine. "You can't run from your past. It always catches up with you." Without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the park. I stood there, shaken and confused, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I hurried back to my car, my thoughts racing. The date had started so perfectly, but it had ended in a way I could never have anticipated. I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, replaying the conversation over and over in my mind. When I got home, I decided to look up Claire online, hoping to find some explanation for her behavior. I searched her name and scrolled through the results until I found something that made my blood run cold. An old news article from several years ago, detailing the mysterious death of a woman named Claire. The photo in the article was the same woman I had just been on. According to the article, she had been found dead in a park, the victim of an unsolved murder. I sat back, my mind reeling. It couldn't be possible. The woman I had met was alive, vibrant, real. But the dates and details matched up. The Claire I had met had died years ago. I can't explain what happened that night, but one thing is certain: my first date with Claire was one I will never forget. A few months ago, I decided to try my luck with online dating. After a few swipes and brief chats, I matched with a woman named Laura. She seemed nice enough, Her profile was filled with pictures of her hiking, traveling, and enjoying life. We exchanged a few messages, and she seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We decided to meet up for dinner at a popular restaurant downtown. I arrived a bit early, nervous but hopeful. The restaurant was cozy and bustling with the dinner crowd. I found a table near the window and waited. Laura arrived shortly after, and I was immediately struck by how different she seemed from her photos. There was an intensity in her eyes that made me uneasy, but I brushed it off, attributing it to first date jitters. The conversation started out fine. Small talk about work, hobbies, and mutual interests. But as the evening progressed, things took a strange turn. Laura's questions became increasingly personal and invasive. She asked about my family, my past relationships, and even my income. Her tone was direct, almost accusatory, and it felt less like a date and more like an interrogation. I tried to steer the conversation to lighter topics, but Laura kept bringing it back to uncomfortable subjects. At one point, she leaned in close and said, "I feel like I've known you forever. Don't you feel the same way?" Her intense gaze and the way she gripped her wine glass made me uneasy. I laughed awkwardly, trying to diffuse the situation. "I guess we have a lot in common," I said, though I didn't really feel that way. I was counting down the minutes until I could politely end the date. When the check arrived, I quickly paid, eager to leave. Laura seemed disappointed, but agreed to call it a night. As we walked out of the restaurant, she asked if I wanted to come back to her place for a drink. I politely declined, saying I had an early morning. Her face darkened for a moment before she forced a smile. "Maybe next time," she said, her voice flat. We said our goodbyes, and I breathed a sigh of relief as I walked to my car. I chalked the evening up to a bad date and hoped Laura would move on. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it. The next day, I received a barrage of texts from Laura. She asked why I hadn't responded to her last message, why I didn't seem interested, and if I was seeing someone else. I replied politely, saying I didn't think we were a good match and wishing her the best. But the messages didn't stop. They became more frequent and demanding, asking for explanations and accusing me of leading her on. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, I blocked her number. For a few days there was silence, and I started to relax, thinking it was over. But then I began to notice strange things happening. One evening I came home to find a note stuck to my door. It read, "You can't ignore me forever." There was no signature, but I knew it was from Laura. My unease turned to fear. How did she know where I lived? I decided to install a security camera outside my apartment door, hoping to catch any unwanted visitors. A few nights later, I reviewed the footage and felt my blood run cold. There was Laura, standing outside my door in the middle of the night, staring at it for what felt like an eternity, before slipping a note under it. The next morning, I found another note. "I know you're home. Why won't you talk to me?" The messages were becoming more unhinged, and I knew I had to do something. I went to the police and filed a report, but there was little they could do without concrete evidence of a threat. They advised me to get a restraining order, which I did, but it didn't seem to deter Laura. She continued to show up outside my apartment, leaving notes and sometimes even gifts, flowers, chocolates, even a stuffed animal with a note that read, "For when you miss me." I started to feel like a prisoner in my own home, constantly looking over my shoulder. I changed my routine, hoping to avoid her, but she always seemed to know where I would be. My friends and family were supportive, but there was only so much they could do. The police increased their patrols in my neighborhood, but Laura was always one step ahead. One night I heard a noise outside my window. I lived on the second floor, so it seemed impossible, but when I looked, there she was. Laura had climbed a tree and was staring at me through the glass. I called the police, my hands shaking, and they arrived quickly, but she was already gone. That was the final straw. I decided to move, breaking my lease and finding a new place on the other side of town. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and made sure no one but close friends and family knew my new address. For a while, things were quiet. I started to feel safe again, slowly rebuilding my sense of normalcy. But the fear never fully left me. Every time I walked down the street, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see Laura's intense gaze following me. It's been months now, and I haven't heard from her. I hope it stays that way. The experience left me wary of online dating and cautious about who I let into my life. I still have the security camera footage, a chilling reminder of how quickly a simple dinner date can turn into a nightmare. It all started when I matched with a guy named Ryan on Tinder. He seemed like the total package, handsome, charming, and well-traveled. His profile was filled with pictures of him at exotic locations, enjoying life to the fullest. After chatting for a few days, he invited me to an exclusive yacht party off the coast of Florida. The idea of a luxurious evening on a yacht was thrilling, and I couldn't resist the offer. On the day of the party, Ryan picked me up in his wine-red Mercedes AMG. He was even more charismatic in person, and I felt an instant connection. We drove to the marina, where a stunning yacht awaited us. The atmosphere was electric, with beautiful people, laughter, and music filling the air. It felt like a scene straight out of a movie. As the yacht set sail, I mingled with the other guests and enjoyed the stunning ocean views. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water. Ryan introduced me to his friends, who were equally charming and welcoming. The night seemed perfect, almost too good to be true. A few hours into the party, I noticed a change in the atmosphere. The music had stopped, and the guests were murmuring nervously. I looked around and saw a group of men boarding the yacht. They were heavily armed and had a menacing presence. Panic set in as the reality of the situation hit me. We were being raided. The men shouted orders in Spanish, and this reminded me of a news report a few months back about raiders from Cuba targeting boats. They rounded up all the guests and crew, forcing us to sit on the deck with our hands on our heads. The leader of the pirates, a tall man with a scar across his face, barked commands at his men and demanded to know who owned the yacht. Ryan stepped forward, trying to appear calm and composed. He spoke to the leader in Spanish, but I could tell he was just as terrified as the rest of us. The pirates searched the yacht, taking valuables and ransacking the cabins. The atmosphere was tense, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. We were held hostage for what felt like hours. The pirates made it clear that they wanted a ransom, and they weren't going to let us go until they got it. The fear and uncertainty were overwhelming, and I couldn't stop thinking about how I had ended up in this nightmare. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, we heard the sound of helicopters overhead. The pirates looked up, their expressions turning from confident to worried. The U.S. Coast Guard had arrived. The leader started shouting orders, and his men scrambled to prepare for a confrontation. The Coast Guard hailed the yacht, demanding that the pirates surrender. Shots were fired, and the situation escalated into chaos. The guests and crew huddled together, trying to stay out of the line of fire. The Coast Guard boarded the yacht, and a fierce battle ensued. It was a blur of gunfire, shouting, and chaos. The pirates fought back fiercely, but they were no match for the well-trained Coast Guard officers. One by one, the pirates were subdued and taken into custody. When the dust settled, the Coast Guard officers helped us off the yacht and onto their vessel. I was shaking with fear and relief, unable to process what had just happened. The officers reassured us that we were safe and that the pirates would be brought to justice. As we were taken back to shore, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to losing everything. What had started as an exciting first date had turned into a horrifying ordeal. Ryan and I were both shaken but grateful to be alive. In the days that followed, the story made headlines, and I found myself recounting the experience to friends, family, and reporters. The incident left me with a newfound appreciation for the unpredictability of life and the importance of being cautious, even when things seem perfect.